of the new Licensing and General Purposes Committee. Yeah, this is something new. It's not just licensing. So, good evening to everyone. My name's Councillor Richard Foote. I'm chair of the Licensing Committee, or Licensing and General Purposes Committee. It's now 6 p.m, so I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of Hounslow's Licensing and General Purposes Committee. I'd like to welcome the members of the committee who are sitting this evening, as well as council officers who will be assisting members throughout the meeting. In addition, I'd like to welcome members of the public who are watching from home. Following the recent increase in COVID-related infections arising from the Omicron variant, the Council's Gold meeting, which is overseeing responses to the pandemic in Hounslow, has asked that, where possible, formal bodies of the Council should meet virtually rather than physically for the time being. This is to minimise the risk of infection amongst members, officers and members of the public. As part of this, the Gold meeting noted that the government has amended the rules on council format decisions making, which requires our body to make decisions physically. Therefore, council bodies. This little bit is a bit outdated, actually. I mean, it's the Gold bit's moved on and now, but this I think was set up too late to actually put it over to a proper physical meeting, so that we're still stuck with on the physical on the. Anyway, I'll continue. Right, the way this meeting will work will be that as chair, I will be running the meeting and inviting people to speak. As it's easy for people to speak over each other in meetings like this, I will ask each member or officer to speak in turn at the appropriate stage, and everyone will have a chance. This will mean that there should normally be no need for people to interrupt or to ask to speak. However, if a member does have an urgent reason to interject, for example, for a point of order, please do so by turning on the microphone and telling me you wish to interject. The exception to this will be the legal committee or licensing officers who may turn their microphones to alert me to any legal governance or licensing issue that needs addressing, although I would expect this to be a rare occurrence. In addition, we have a producer of the meeting from our ICT department who may also contact me if necessary, but I think it's unlikely, and if all goes well, as I hope it will. The etiquette for members of the committee and for the officers who are expecting to speak will be to mute your microphones until you're asked to speak. This means that only one person will be speaking at a time and there will be no background noise, making it easier for us all to follow the meeting and also for those watching at home. I also ask members always to say who they are when they make a contribution and to speak slowly and clearly for the same reason. Right, can we see you've all got your mics muted? Looks good. Yep, right. Members of the public are reminded that the agenda and all the reports being considered by the committee tonight can be found on the council website under the Licensing Committee meetings page. So if you want to see them, it's where to look. I also want to make sure that all members have seen the agenda and the reports. Please now speak if you've not had them. No? Right. If you should find that you're having technical problems and need to log out of the meeting and come back in again, please let me know immediately, ideally beforehand, but if not, afterwards by turning on your microphone. This would be a permitted interruption, and we can then decide how far we need to recap if that's necessary, or if the member needs to not vote on that item. Finally, I'd say that any member of the public listening or watching, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope this meeting will go well, but it is the first time the Licensing Committee has been running this way, and we should ask that you bear with us if there are any hitches. Thank you. We'll move into the first item of the agenda. So the first item on the agenda, right, Now, procedure. I'm now going to invite the officer to introduce the first report, which is a review of the statement of gambling principles.
Right. Good evening, councillors. My name is Vicky Wallace. I'm the Assistant Director for Community Enforcement and Regulatory Services, and we have the review of our new gambling policy for your consideration this evening. I have a presentation which I'd like to share with you, so I will just bring this up. If you could just bear with me one moment. Right. Are you able to see that?
Yes, I can see it. I think.
Lovely.
Anybody got any problems? No? Okay, let's assume they're all can see it then, Vicky.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Right, so this is to give you a little bit of background to the report itself. So we as a council have a gambling policy which we need to make under the Gambling Act 2005, and this needs to be reviewed every 3 years. Now, as a council, we have a duty which is based around very much around kind of premises, which so it looks at our betting shops, our bingo premises, our adult gaming centres, and also the issuing of permits for gaming machines. So this is very much a local premises-based approach, and councils do not deal with things like online gambling, the National Lottery, or gambling adverts. So where these are issues which are of a national issue, then this is where the Gambling Commission comes in, and the council needs to work very closely with the Gambling Commission and make sure that we follow the guidance that they provide to councils for how we handle gambling matters. So the policy itself has been reviewed, we've updated it, we've taken on board the Gambling Commission national guidance, and what we found this time is that they've really emphasised the risks of gambling related harm in the local area. And as a result, there's been the introduction of what is called the new local area profile, which then highlights certain areas where there may be more risk of gambling harm. And the idea is to identify these areas of high risk to help us address the licensing objectives. So this is where we're looking to prevent gambling being a source of crime or disorder, and that's particularly in relation to money laundering, and that's very much an area that the Gambling Commission are involved with. Similarly, in terms of gambling being conducted, that it needs to be conducted in a fair and open way. And if we were to find any issues, that's a matter we would relate and refer on to the Gambling Commission. And then our third licensing objective is the protection of children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. And that's very much the area that we are focusing on this evening. And so the idea is that we would have our gambling policy supported by the local area profile, which will then enable the council to make evidence-based decisions in terms of whether the area is an area of high or low risk for gambling-related harm. And knowing where these areas are, that anyone making an application to the council for one of these licences, that they would make a better application as it would reflect whether they would know if it was an area of high risk. So they would then put in more safeguards to ensure that gambling wasn't an issue or didn't become an issue in those areas. So the policy itself has been changed in some way. We now, as I say, have introduced the local area profile. Now, this is not actually part of the policy. So this means that we can review it when we need to, as opposed to waiting, as we would normally do for the policy itself, for it being a 3-year period. So if there was a significant change in the area or something that we felt needed to be addressed, then we could review the profile without needing to review the whole policy and go out for consultation. So it's a much quicker process to keep it separate if we need to review it. The policy itself covers the different types of premises licence we have, the different types of permits. It goes through the process that we go through when an application is made for a gambling premises licence. It covers the inspection and the compliance and enforcement that's available to officers when we inspect licensed premises. It also covers the applications for permits and notices, and our consultation arrangements, and also what happens at the licensing panel hearings. So in conjunction with the gambling policy, we have the local area profile. Now, this is the first time that we've used this approach in Hounslow. This is an approach which is supported by the Local Government Association, and it uses a model called the GeoFutures model, which has been developed with kind of experts in the field and was originally commissioned by Manchester City Council and Westminster City Council. And this is a model which identifies the sort of main characteristics which are associated with gambling related harm, and has then developed a weighting that's attributed to them. And then we use local data which we've gathered from various teams across the council. We've been able to bring it together, and rather than looking at things in a ward basis, we've broken it down to smaller areas, to the LSOAs, the lower super output areas, which then enables us to identify in quite particular areas where we would have potential areas of high risk. And so the idea is that we can look at different characteristics. There can be a series of maps for each of the characteristics, and then when they're combined together, we can map these kind of hotspot areas for high risk premises. So we're going to I'll talk you through what we've managed to provide with the development of the local area profile. But the idea is that bringing all of this information together will enable the evidence-based approach to be taken when decisions are being made as to whether a licence should be granted or not. So the factors that we take into account when we've developed the local area profile is based on what information we hold and which we can verify within the borough. And so we've looked at issues like sort of educational where there are educational establishments, because if you're a young person in the borough, then you are viewed as obviously being vulnerable to gambling related harm. We've identified areas where we've got sort of where we've got GP surgeries, we've got hospitals, we've got housing that focuses on mental health. We've got looking at areas where there might be gambling associated crime, as well as areas of deprivation. And that might be represented by job centres, where there might be food banks, there might be pawn shops, or payday loan shops as well. And also, obviously, the location of gambling premises themselves. So if we look at the map, if we start off with the map of the location of gambling premises, this, if I can just talk you through this to start with, the areas of dark red are the areas where we have the most gambling premises. So from this map here, you will see that we've got areas in Feltham West and Hanworth Park. We've got areas in central Hounslow, in Hounslow West, up in Heston East, also Isleworth and Turnham Green. So as I say, the red areas show the areas where we have the most gambling premises. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up a slide which actually has the number of gambling premises. And then once all the other risk factors have been brought in, you will see a slightly different map sitting beside it. So this second map, you will see that there's a lot more red that's displayed on it. Now, as I say, the map on the left is the one that you've just seen, which is the gambling premises. The map on the right takes the gambling premises, but it also factors in the factors of deprivation, where the educational establishments are. Other issues that we were able to bring into the equation, and you will find that it actually looks quite different. So this is where it is now identifying where there are higher risks of gambling related harm. So what you find is our highest areas are now are still in Feltham West, which had been identified earlier on. But we've picked up Heston West, which wasn't an area. If you compare these two areas, it wasn't an area of high risk before. We've got Hounslow West, which was, but again, the area that we've now identified as being a particular high risk wasn't an area that was high risk before. We've got 2 areas within central Hounslow, which is along the High Street, and we also have Heston Central as well. So the other areas that we had previously identified before as being high risk, such as Heston East and Turnham Green, you will see on this new map, where we're looking at our high risk areas, that these do not feature nearly so prominently. So by using these maps, we're now able to show it isn't only the premises that we're concerned with, but we're also looking at the potential impact on the local community as well. And this then gives us a much better feel for where there would be concerns if a new gambling premises application was to be introduced. And so if we look at this map in a little bit more detail, we have identified 5 areas of the highest risk, and we call these our gambling vulnerability zones. So when it comes to a licensing panel to make a decision as to whether a license should be granted for a premises maybe in one of these areas, then this would be where there'd be really particular scrutiny be given to the application and what the applicant says they're going to do to mitigate any potential harm resulting from the running of their business there. So if we move on, so this actually identifies the areas that we have as our highest vulnerability. And this is, as I say, Hounslow Central on and around the High Street, Hounslow West around Bulstrode Avenue, Heston West around the Heston Phoenix Distribution Park, and Felton West on and around the High Street. So we went out to consult, and I think it was one of the first opportunities for the new Constitution's minor matters procedure to be used, to go out for approval, to go out to consult. Normally we would have a licensing committee and we would come to you to say to ask for permission to go out to consult. At the time, we had the new Constitution, and with respect to the limits or potential limits on actually holding meetings, where a matter could be handled as a minor matter, and it was considered that going out to consult on a policy was something that could be handled by this procedure, that this was the way to go. But part of it was that when the results of the consultation came back to committee, we needed to draw your attention to the fact that this is the procedure that we had used. So we went out to consult between July and September last year, and we had a number of responses, some of which were identifying that there was consideration that already there were too many gambling premises, that they were clustered in areas, and there was a big desire to try and close existing premises. Now, I would point out at this stage that at one point Hounslow had 68 licensed premises, licensed for gambling within the borough. In actual fact, this number is reduced from 68 betting shops down to 35 at the moment. So I know that I understand that the information on the Gambling Commission website does show 68, and that is a matter that we're actually trying to rectify at present. So I would say that although people say that we have too many gambling premises, we do actually have far fewer than we used to. There has also been a request for a cumulative impact policy, and if there couldn't be a cumulative impact policy, to use the data that was available to the licensing committee to refuse new applications. And so this is something that has been considered, and there will be a further word on this subsequently. But unfortunately, at this stage, we are not able to include a cumulative impact policy within the gambling policy itself. There's concerns about the impacts of gambling on individuals and, you know, what the premise is doing about self-exclusion, about safeguarding. And there is a lot of information that officers know of in terms of what the businesses are doing, in terms of making sure that there's what the businesses do, how their staff are trained, and what they do to make sure these protections are in place. And I think what's very interesting is that one of the comments that we had was that it was about making gambling in our borough more responsible and safe, so as to minimise the downfall into problem gambling and its associated negative impact on our community. And I do hope with our new policy that is something that this is what we're aiming for, and this is what I hope it will achieve. So at the moment, we're here obviously in the Licensing and General Purposes Committee, and we're recommending the adoption and publication by the Borough Council of the Gambling Statement of Licensing Principles, which is forming Appendix 1 to this report. We're asking you to note the local area profile at Appendix 2, and also to consider the responses to the consultation in Appendix 3. And from this meeting tonight, the report will go through with its appendices for with your recommendation. It will go through to Borough Council on the 1st of March, and it will then, there will be a period where there will be a publication to say that this is what we're looking to introduce. So it will be ready for implementation on the 1st of May this year. Thank you. Now, have we got any questions? Councillor Foote, did you want to say a word?
Sorry, Chair, it's Wendy here. Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I don't think we did declarations of interest. Can we just check that no one's got declaration they want to make before they make comments? Thank you.
Right, has anybody got a declaration of any interest? How many people own bookies in the high street? None? Okay. Okay, Wendy?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Chair.
Right. Right, now can we move on to questions? So I'm looking down the list of people who should be here. I notice Councillor Aksa Ahmed is not here. We've had apologies from Councillor Surinder Purivel and Councillor Mohammed Umair. So other than that, everybody else should be here. So I'm going to go down a list and call members now to ask a question. Sorry?
It's Mr. Verdi here. I noticed that 3 councillors have got their hands up symbol. So I just wanted to make sure that wasn't in response to the declaration of interest or anything like that. Okay.
John, Karen, Gabriella, have you declared an interest?
No, I have no interest in gambling.
No interest.
Okay. Right. Well, the way I'm going to take it, I've got a list of members who are present, and I'll go down that list and call you to make any statements or comments. Okay. So there's no need to raise your hand. You will be given an opportunity to speak now. So I'm going to go down the list. So the first one on the list is Councillor Medea Asim. Do you have any questions or anything to say?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Chair. There are no questions from me as of yet, but if there are, I will raise my hand. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Councillor Harleen Atwell?
No, Richard, thank you.
Not at the moment. Okay. Councillor Unsa Chowdhury?
Nothing from me at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Richard Eason? You're muted, Richard. You're still muted.
He's not speaking.
Oh,
right, sorry. Right, sorry, Chair. I'm trying to negotiate the cursor around the screen. Yes, a question really about the number of consultation responses. On page 8, it says there were 19 responses received. That struck me as a relatively low number. I wonder if the officers could comment on that. I had thought that for the subject matter we'd have got quite a lot more.
Yes, I mean, it's always better to have more responses than fewer responses, and it is disappointing we didn't get more. But the comments that we had back were very helpful and very useful, and gave us a real sense of people's concern about gambling premises. But yes, I agree. It would have been nicer and better if we had more responses. But we did have 19.
Yeah, one of those, of course, was the Heston Action Group, which was representing a number of other people. Richard, yeah, you'll see. I think they got at least 2 comments in there. Right. Okay, Richard. Move on. Gabriella Giles, do you have something to ask?
I do have a question. Thank you, Richard. So, Victoria, can I just ask you to clarify how many premises we have in the borough? Because I just want to make sure my maths adds up with what's...
Right. So our current number of betting shops is 35.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, it's either 8 or 9 adult gaming centres.
Okay. Yeah, no, okay. So we're looking at about 45 type.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of aligns. So I'm just looking at that, and then looking at the LAP with all risk factors considered. Are there certain things, are there kind of concerns that they might be kind of slightly more kind of, I would say, I don't want to say risk alarming, but certainly take into consideration a higher potential risk for some areas than others? For example, like Hounslow Heath, where it only has 1 betting premises. If I look at the other map, it's still kind of one of the second highest ratings on the overall risk factor. And then obviously there are other areas where there's more densely kind of populated pockets. I'm just kind of curious and kind of cautious that potentially there are areas that are showing that there's a higher risk, where actually the opportunity for somebody to engage in gambling within those premises is actually quite small.
Right. Okay. Yes. No. I take your point.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is that where you have a gambling premises, you actually have a weighting of 25 that is given to it, and a lot of the other weightings might only be in single figures. Even kind of 1 point. Yeah. So the fact you actually have a gambling premises there does mean that it is significantly weighted in that direction. I think it's interesting to see the other factors that go into it, and you'll see in Appendix 2 that you've got a series of maps which show the other information that comes together. Yeah. So although there might only be 1 premises that's listed as being in that ward, what you will find though is that because of the other factors that are around it would make that 1 premises, or the addition of a further premises, much more problematic there because of the other risk factors that are in the area.
It was more the fact that like there are certain areas that, like Hounslow Heath, I'm just using this as an example because it's quite obvious on the map. It's like in number 2, but there's only 1 location there, whereas there are other areas around like Hounslow Central and Hounslow South where we know that there's a lot more premises there, but it's a level 1 type thing. So I'm just kind of looking at the proportionality given the density of gambling premises and how that impacts, given the fact that it has a factor of 25.
Yeah, so I think that it reflects the significance of the other factors. Mm-hmm. The fact that you've got, you might be looking at areas where perhaps, the sort of the factors around, particularly around deprivation, or particularly you might have an area where you've got a lot of schools that these will be factors that will make a huge difference to the weighting that it finally gets. Yeah.
And obviously there's a big, large green space in Hounslow Heath, so it might just appear to be bigger and broader spread than
that's right.
Yeah, what the map actually entails. I think for me, it's just kind of giving some sort of understanding to the proportionality of the map and the potential risks therein, because it seems like there are areas that are quite alarming when in all fairness, it's not as bad as it may seem because the number of premises is so small.
Right. Yes, indeed. And so, but as I say, I think it's significant if you've only got one premises, but it scores highly, that it just shows that the other factors will play a very significant part as well. So you have some areas where obviously, you know, in terms of like Hounslow High Street, you will have a number of premises that are there, but actually the other factors where you know, in the areas that you've identified, that you will find that the other factors really come into play there, in terms particularly on the kind of the deprivation factor, for instance.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Gabriella. Councillor Afzal Kiani.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have one question. As Gabriella said, in Hounslow Heath, it's a large high-risk area. What do we do to keep an eye on that area? Do we have any system in place to keep an eye and see, you know, means if high-risk area is monitored or something like that?
Yes. So what we do is we have licensing enforcement officers who have recently completed a round of inspections, and from that they will be able to then develop a risk rating for how frequently they need to be visited, and that will also take into account the risk rating from our local area profile in terms of the concerns about, you know, the impacts on the community. And so from that we will then determine how frequently the visits need to be made. So where you've got an area that is identified as being high risk, then we would ensure that additional premises inspections are carried out in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Tony Lukey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want one thing that, there's a few things that bother me about our gambling in the borough, and that is the I don't know who's responsible for it or who sat on the panels to approve all those slot machine shops in Hounslow Town Centre, and you know, I noticed that even one of them is being one of them is being reviewed at the moment from 24 hours to more sensible hours, although I would say how sensible, that is up for discussion. So you know, why you know, how can we curtail, really, through a policy, how can we curtail these 24-hour and other or maybe less, but you know, the one that we're and then there are, you know, slot machine shops, casinos, Mercure, or whoever they are. You know, why are we allowing them, and how will this policy help curtail it? The other thing is on page 78 of the agenda, characteristics we have not used. Women, older people, immigrants, all right, prisoners, probation, yeah, fine. You know, we might not be able to collar them, but low income, low IQ. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are vulnerable there. In that bullet pointed table there, that we're not really using as in weighting, and I'll be concerned about that, because you know, who more than perhaps, you know, the poor, whoever they are, but people, you know, people with lower incomes are a little bit more, maybe desperate people, maybe maybe desperate, and they will look to chance to try and pull them out of all this. So why are we not using those weights to again to better manage this? And of course the total, you know, the thing that we're not being able to we're not able to address here with this policy is the other gambling that is done via telephone apps and similar. You know, what can we do as a local authority to educate folk to be less vulnerable? You know, when the fun stops, it says on the telly, but yeah, all right, you know, who listens or talks to the telly? These are my observations. We're not going to sort it out tonight, but These are my observations and concerns. The main concern is all these slot machine shops that we've allowed, and we don't always know what goes on behind them. Back in the day, when they were quite prolific, when these places were quite prolific in the West End of London, there used to be magnets for other nefarious activities and attracting the vulnerable. That's it, really, Chair. And thank you, Vicky.
Right, thank you. So if I could maybe pick up on your piece about the sort of telephone apps and what can we as a council do about that? One thing which is coming up is actually the review of the Gambling Act itself. Now, when the Gambling Act was introduced back in 2005, online betting, all the things that we now use on our mobile phones, that just wasn't a thing at that point. And so obviously technology has changed since the Gambling Act came in. So they're doing a review to actually recognise that. So what I'm anticipating will happen is at some point, hopefully this year, that we will get to the stage where there will be a consultation process in terms of the changes that they're proposing to make. So I would hope that we would then have an opportunity to comment on that and feedback in terms of whatever proposals are coming through in terms of whatever changes they're looking to make in this area. This is something that we would have an opportunity to comment on. Okay. So in terms of Councillor Luke, in terms of not using all of the data, we've got Thomas Morgan on the line in the meeting, and I can see he's put one or two comments in the chat already. Thomas, could I maybe ask you to come in and actually say a few words about the data to explain just how we had used certain data?
Yeah, sure. Hello. So Tom Morgan, I'm the Insight and Intelligence Manager in London Borough of Hounslow. So some data we just didn't have good quality data. So Councillor Lukey spoke about low income. So we did use deprivation indices, and in part low income is addressed through the deprivation indices. For data items such as low IQ, we could have used proxy data, in other words, qualifications that we know people have from Census 2011. It was decided that that's almost a proxy too far, and just because you've done A levels or done a degree, it doesn't mean that you have a high IQ. I won't pass any more comments. So the data items that were used, it was because the data quality was we thought was high quality and reasonably recent, and we felt would address the need for the report.
Thank you, Thomas. Okay. Right. Okay, I'm going to move on. Karen Smith. Karen,
hi. Yeah. I suppose I'd really like. I'd like us to have gone further. I think a cumulative impact policy is really important because there are so many, especially these slot machine places in the high street, that it draws people into the area. I've had residents, young men, tell me that they don't like to go to the high street at night because of the people hanging around outside of these gambling places. They're often angry, shouting, arguing. And yeah, I think, it's okay to have enough gambling, some gambling places, but I think there's already too many in the high street. So I would have preferred to have been able to start a cumulative impact policy as soon as possible. That's my main issue.
Thanks, Karen. Victoria, do you have any response?
Well, I could say something about the cumulative impact policy approach. I mean, Councillor Foote, was that something you wanted to raise, or are you happy for me to cover it?
No, I think this is an appropriate time. Yeah.
Right. So in terms of the cumulative impact policy, this is something that we've looked at. We know that it had come up in consultation. We know that this is something that, you know, councillors have raised in the past. And as you're aware, obviously, we have it for licensed premises under the Licensing Act. And so we actually have them in hand so already for licensed premises. So we've looked in terms of whether we could adopt this approach for the cumulative impact area for gambling premises. However, what we're finding is that under the legislation and under the guidance that we have from the Gambling Commission, it just simply isn't a mechanism that we can employ for gambling policies, unfortunately. And so the idea is that you would be taking the local area profile, and in a way it's almost like a kind of cumulative impact policy kind of with extras, because it's actually taking the number of gambling premises that you've got in an area and adding on all the other factors to then identify where the highest risk areas are. But if you took it back down to where do you have the most premises, then you will actually have that as a kind of a layer on the map. So we've explored, we're in the process of exploring how else we can tackle this, because we know that people are concerned where you have a number of premises together in an area. And so what we're looking to do at the moment is to see, well, if we can't include it within the gambling policy, how else could we do it? And this is where we're exploring actually having something under the planning regime, where they could actually have a policy with respect to gambling premises and have a cumulative impact policy using the planning regime rather than the licensing regime. So at the moment, as I say, unfortunately, we can't introduce it as part of our gambling policy, and it just, you know, the way that everything is set up doesn't allow for a cumulative impact policy. And as I say, the local area profile is kind of the way to go for gambling premises. But as I say, we are looking to see what else we can explore to actually try and introduce one, albeit not as part of the licensing regime, but as a planning policy. Because as I say, this kind of talks are ongoing at the moment, so I wouldn't want to make any promises, but we are definitely looking at it to see what we can do. All right.
Is that how Newham do it? Because I mean, just to answer what Tony Lukey said earlier about, you know, who approves all the venues in the high street, the fact is we've had no powers to reject them, and it would just be nice to have the power to be able to say there's too many here already, as we can with alcohol. Do Newham use the planning laws? Or?
Yes, that's my understanding. That's right. But it's interesting, under the Gambling Act that we actually have a statutory duty to look to permit gambling premises, which, you know, you might not like it, but that's the approach that has to be taken. So as I say, this is why it's quite difficult to kind of go against that, to say a cumulative impact policy as itself under licensing. That's kind of the contradiction, which is why we're now thinking, well, actually, how else could we tackle it? And as I say, it's trying to use the planning route, and that's hopefully the way forward. And I can see there's a comment in terms of when. I wouldn't like to say when, but as I say, conversations are being had, and let's see what we can get put through.
Can I say, Karen, I share your opinion on this, and it has been something that I've been in discussions with, trying to find ways and means, but it isn't easy. But I'm not given up by any choice. You know, it's something we've got to push forward, because you're quite right. We just don't have enough means of actually saying. I'm one of my sorry, I'll come to my questions later, so we'll come to that. But in the meantime, I'm going to Councillor Tack.
Thank you, Chair. Well, enough has been said about cumulative impact already. I have a concern that this cumulative impact, or impact by ethnic minority and demography, is based on census from 2011, which is data too old, 11 years old data, and a huge change can happen in 11 years. complete dynamics can change. So are we going to be seeing new impact based on a recent census, which happened last year?
If I could answer part of it, and then I think I'll ask Thomas to come in on this one, if you could assist on the actual census data itself and when the next material would become available. But this is where we have the advantage with the local area profile, that it's not tied into the 3-year review. So what we can do is we could review it I'm not sure how quickly the census data becomes available, but when it does become available, then this is something that we can look to then review the local area profile in this light of the later data, and then it might be that we'd have a different picture again. But Thomas, are you able to come in on when the most recent data might be available for us?
Yeah, sure. So the census 2021, as you correctly said, was last March. We haven't even had the most basic population figures come out of the census data yet. National statistics, I think, are saying from April there should be the start of information coming through. So much of the information that we would require for the local area profile would be coming after that. So the key statistics tables, and then more detail following that. So it is sort of late spring onwards. And as Victoria mentioned, the way this is done, we will then update this as soon as new and more recent data comes in.
So will we wait for another 3 years when the review happens, or we'll do that as soon as the data becomes available?
So we would look to liaise with Tom Morgan and his colleagues. When we understand what data they have, then we'll be in a position to review it. So if it is available sooner than 3 years, then we would look to review it within that time period. As you say, you know, using data from 2011 isn't ideal, and if there is more recent data which will give us a better picture of what is actually happening now in the borough, then that is what we would look to use. So we would update the policy, but not necessarily wait for 3 years. Would not update, sorry, the local area profile itself. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And as Councillor Smith and partially Councillor Foote has already mentioned about giving some sort of powers in saying no, at the moment our wings are clipped in terms of we can't say no based on the data or with any argument to these licenses, but I believe the committee should be given or empowered with some sort of power where we can say this is going to negatively impact the area and deny the betting license.
Nice to have, Councillor Tack.
Oh, well, so, that's why I said, like you partially said, you'll have your turn, of course.
So if you find that you have an application that comes up in your ward, then obviously you would be in a position to make comments on it. And obviously, if you were on a panel that was making a decision on one, then you would need to make sure that the conditions and the way that the applicant is presenting what they will do to mitigate any risk, that you are satisfied that that is going to be effective in the area. Okay.
Thank you, Victoria.
Right. Okay. Councillor Todd.
Well, it's been a long wait, Richard.
I've got an even longer wait, John. I'm behind.
Yeah, but you hold the stage most of the time. I can't do that. I've never seen a report that's utter speculation. It reminds me of the Salvation Army probing prostitution. There's not one bit of data in this report that's indicative on gambling. Where's the evidence from the Gambling Commission? You talk about staff being trained to do inspections. Yeah, what are they going to look for, Victoria? Right. Where are the details of any offences? That do you have any data at all from the Gambling Commission or anyone at all?
So what sort of data would you be thinking about?
Well, I'd read by way of example that they're worried about the well, you tell me, I don't deal with them, you do, but they do have prosecution powers. They certainly give guidance. I mean, they seem to give the big companies a hard time, Paddy Power and others. I would have thought you'd be part of that process, but when your guy talks about intelligence, I mean, it's just broad speculation that there's a correlation between poor people and intensive gambling. That's utter speculation. But I want to drill in. I think Councillor Smith asked the most important question. Are you really saying this is simply a document that we read and just have frustration? What can we do? When your inspector goes around to do a check, what can they do that would put this policy into action?
Right. Okay. So let's talk about when an inspection gets made. So our inspectors have a very extensive checklist which they use to go through how the premises is operating, where are the machines located, what security do they have, what CCTV do they have, what measures have they got to ensure that they're running as safe as an operation as possible. So you've got some that might have motion sensors, you've got some that have, as I say, CCTV, you're going to have security, you've got staff that are trained. There's a number of different measures that they can put into place. And so you have, as I say, a very extensive checklist that our officers need to go through in great detail to make sure that they are actually operating in the way that they are supposed to. We found there are, some premises where we've needed to pay closer attention, but on the whole, we've been quite surprised at the general compliance that we have found from the premises that have been inspected. So in terms of actually bringing...
Can I interrupt you, Victoria? Can I interrupt? Yeah. Surely our ambition is to stop people being reckless with gambling. So the fact that premises have CCTV and all that stuff is ancillary to the operation. How can you possibly detect someone who spends hundreds of pounds on these one-armed bandits? Where's the evidence for that?
Sorry, so in terms of... Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Well, you say by way of example, there's a correlation between gambling and poor people. I've read in the newspaper when some of our colleagues were making representations about the £100 one-armed bandits, that people had lost lots of money. But what will this piece of legislation, or whatever you call it, report, aid in reducing gambling or reckless gambling?
So the fixed odds betting terminals, which used to have the £100 betting stakes, now these are now gone. So we don't have stakes at that sort of level. They're now down to £2, and so that's because of the money that was generated by the larger machines like this. That was when I think we had the proliferation of gambling premises and on a lot of the high streets. Since those fixed odds betting terminals have been reduced right down from £100 down to £2, then you find that obviously a number of premises think, well, actually, I'm not making the money I used to, and a number of them have closed down. So you talk about, we're making a connection between people that are poor and people who gamble. We're not making a connection between people who are poor and people who gamble. The connection is that if you are poor and gamble, it has a much... it's got a greater impact on you because you haven't got the money to sustain, everything else you want to do if you've used it in gambling. So it isn't a question that we're suggesting that the poor are more likely to gamble, not at all. What we're concerned with is the fact that there could be more impacted by gambling because...
Victoria, I accept that. But one final question, if I wouldn't mind, Chair. Yeah. Have we ever successfully opposed a licensed betting shop or premises involving machines?
We have, well, interestingly enough, we have an application in at the moment, and I was looking through our records, and really we have perhaps one a year I think the last one we had in was for a variation on the layout. I mean, we get very few of these premises, and particularly new premises coming in. But as I say, we have one that's in at the moment, and I've spoken with our officers, and our licensing enforcement team have concerns around the fact that it will be operating. And so what we are wanting to do is to make sure that, with their experience, they know how these things operate. We know that we want to make sure that they are able to put their representation in. It will then go to a licence panel hearing for the decision to be made. So yes, as I say, we don't get very many gambling applications, but when we do, our officers will be in a position to put a response in on them. So what we're looking to do is basically to say we have licensing enforcement officers who are out, who are dealing with the premises. What we're looking to do is to get information. We are gathering information about how they're running, how our officers are then in a position to put representations in to make sure that we're getting the best possible situation if a premises does come into operation, that we have the most safeguards in place for it to run.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Quickly, I'm going to go back for my questions back on to situation with one, cumulative impact policy or the local area profile. I think we've got to make there is a difference between those. So it's important we recognise that, but I'm concerned that we've identified high risk areas, in red areas as I call them, but it's how we manage those. That's what worries me. Is what are we actually doing? I mean, how many prosecutions have we brought against licensed premises in the last 5 years? I've never seen, I think I'm trying to think how long I've been on now. It's about 4 or 5 years. I've been on the licensing committee. I've never seen a licensing shop application. Now, that may be because I know that in this time, licensing shops have actually been reducing for the reason you stated about the £100 made it not very. They weren't making the sort of fortunes that they were making previously. So, that may be the case, but I'm just wondering how we're looking. I feel like many of the members have said that we're a little bit almost armless in how we are able to deal with these people, especially when we've seen high concentrations. But what do we do there? How do we contact it, and how many complaints do we get that we can work on?
We have very, very few complaints about premises. We have very few new applications that come in. And we're finding that premises are more likely to be closing down than opening up, because whether it's, because it's the change in the betting stakes, and also the fact that more people seem to be betting online rather than going out to the betting shops, for instance. But we do know that for a lot of people, they are a source of company, companionship, somewhere to go. So, they do serve, in a way, a kind of a social purpose in the borough. But in terms of complaints that we get, I can't remember when we last had a complaint about a gambling premises.
Oh. So
it isn't an area that we're looking in terms of thinking that there's a big problem in them. I mean, I know that there are very mixed views in terms of whether they're a good thing to have or not, but in terms of the fact that they are allowed to be there, they are operating in a way that is not causing complaints with respect to things that people feel they need to contact the council about in terms of how they're actually operating.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. I'm going to ask if any of the members have any other questions or comments to make, and I'll take it with by hands up, and then call out where we go from there. So if there are any members that have any further questions or have a comment to make, please can you just show your hands?
Yeah, Chair, John Todd again, sorry.
Yes, John. I meant
Yeah,
the mechanical hand, but fine. Okay, I've got you.
My hand is mechanical, but it's linked to my body. Victoria, you're head of enforcement, so I can give you the hard questions, really. Have you really taken on extra staff to police things where we haven't got any complaints? I mean, there's so many off-licence selling bogus beer and things like that and cigarettes. Are we perhaps misdirected, with great respect?
Well, when I talk about licensed premises, I'm talking in terms of the gambling premises. So,
I'm talking about value for money, yeah.
Yeah, so what I would say is that we have been fortunate to be able to bring, well, we're in the process of bringing in an additional two licensing enforcement officers, and so I'm really happy that we'll be able to do that, to actually be able to do additional work with respect to licensed premises within the borough, that we will be able to have a kind of a robust inspection program, that you can have confidence that that our licensing policy is being followed through for you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
John, are there any other questions from members?
No, Richard, hi, it's Harleen. I just need to leave because I've got another meeting. That'd be okay if I could leave.
Yeah, okay then, Harleen.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody.
Right, thank you for your attendance. Right, if there's no further questions, then has anybody got right, I don't know what motion we'd put for this. I think all we can do is to note, isn't it? I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so are the members agreeing to note the report?
Noted.
Noted. Anybody against?
Yes.
Was that yes, against, or?
No.
Is that Councillor Tack speaking?
No, this is Councillor Kenny. I said, agreed,
Oh, right. I can only see faces. I can't see. Well, anyway, so there's nobody against. So we agree we note the report. Can I move on to the second report then, which is actually one under the health and safety element of our committee, as it is now. So we move on to page 128 on your papers.
Sorry, Chair.
Anyway, sorry, Vicky, can I say thank you very much for your attendance and your contribution?
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair,
could I just clarify something? What we've in terms of noting the report, do we need to actually we have an area where we need to recommend it's being passed up to the Borough Council? I want to just make sure that we've covered what we need to cover by way of the report itself.
Yeah, Chair, I was going to say the same comment as well. This is Baljeet Burley speaking, because the proposal was to, number one, recommend adoption and publication by the Borough Council of the gambling statement of licensing principles in Appendix 1, and then note the local area profile at Appendix 2, and then consider the responses. So I just echo what Victoria just mentioned there. So if
I'm in the hands of the officers who tell me. I'm assuming that that it's obviously got to go to council, but whether it goes via cabinet or not, I don't know.
So my understanding is that under the new constitution, it doesn't need to go to cabinet, so it will go from this committee to Borough Council. But I think the issue for us is at the moment is that this committee needs to recommend the adoption and publication by Borough Council, and that's I think what we need to have your agreement on.
Okay, point taken. Yep. So can I well, if anybody's opposed to that, can they show? And then otherwise, I'll take it that it's unanimous. No, nobody's opposed to it. Going to council. Right. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Now, I think. Right. Are you taking this report, Melanie?
I am. Yes, Councillor Foot. I am. I don't have a presentation, but I will present the report. Our report presents and recommends the London Borough of Hounslow Corporate Health and Safety Policy 2022. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 requires the council to prepare and maintain a written statement of its health and safety policy, and this outlines its structure and its arrangements for the management of health and safety as it applies to staff and others who may be impacted by its activities. It's our main health and safety policy under which the council seeks to provide services and buildings which are safe for customers, members of the public and its staff. A few details about the policy. So it applies to all the council's activities at all of its premises. It's an overarching policy under which other health and safety related policies such as our fire safety policy are created. In terms of its structure, it's split into 3 parts. Part 1 includes the health and safety policy statement, which sets out the council's commitment to managing health and safety and develop our health and safety management system in an environment of continuous improvement. Part 2 sets out the organisation for managing health and safety. It outlines the governance arrangements for ensuring the effective oversight of health and safety management across the council, as well as consulting and communicating with staff, and it identifies the roles and responsibilities. Responsibilities covering all the levels and areas of the organisation are outlined, and this recognises that everyone within the council has a part to play in keeping everyone safe. And lastly, part 3 covers the arrangements for managing health and safety. This section provides an overview on the procedures and guidance for managing health and safety, including the health and safety management system, how we assess risk management, and our performance monitoring and review processes. It gives the detail basically on the how and what we practically do to manage safety and prevent injury, whether that's through training or through a safe system of work. Those policies and procedures are not attached to the health and safety policy. They sit within a health and safety manual that is referenced within the policy. So the council's committed to review this policy annually, and this is to ensure that it remains fit for purpose. It remains reflective of any changes in legislation, best practice in terms of the organisational structure, and particularly from any lessons that are learned from incidents and accidents throughout the year. So it is quite a quick moving policy. And the policy presented to the committee has undergone review from the corporate health and safety team, the council's consultative groups, which is made up of officers and union representatives and some key stakeholders. So the policy actually broadly remains the same as that agreed in the previous period, but there are 2 amendments that are being proposed. The first is inclusion of Lambton Group under roles and responsibilities. Now, previously, Lambton companies were referenced under 2.110 contractor and partners, but the Lambton Group has grown, and it was felt that a separate reference was more appropriate to reinforce the roles and responsibilities when working with our wholly owned companies. And this has now been included as section 2.111. The second revision relates to the revised governance arrangements that now apply following the transfer of the Health and Safety Committee functions into the new Licensing and General Purposes Committee. The policy has been updated at section 2.2 to reflect the new government arrangements, and a scheme of delegation reflecting this change, developed to support approvals and further recommendations as required, has also been included. So it just remains to say that this policy is the key safety policy, which outlines the council's commitment to securing the health, safety and wellbeing of staff and others. We have to keep it in date, and failure to review or republish and communicate the policy really would demonstrate a lack of commitment. The aim from my representation here is that, subject to any amendments, that we recommend the Corporate Health and Safety Policy 2022 to Cabinet for approval.
Right. Thank you very much, Melanie. Right, any questions from members of Melanie?
Are you going to do alphabetically again, Councillor Foot?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to go alphabetically again, or?
No, I'll go on the hands raised on this one, I think, yeah.
Richard, John Todd.
Yeah, go on, John.
Yeah, welcome to the council, Melanie.
Thank you.
I've got a job and a half.
Been here a long time.
Okay, well, I'm a long wreck. Yeah. I love the expression when you said it, you decided corporately. I want to clarify the council's participation. And secondly, there's nothing like asking for current data Where's our areas of weakness in our current policy and/or application?
So I'll take the second question first, Councillor. So I would say our areas of weakness at the moment are around compliance. So we're working hard to make sure we get our compliance figures up, and that's just not compliance in relation to property, but that's also compliance in terms of cooperation that we have around the council. So I think that we're very good at a lot of the doing. We're not very good at the moment in terms of demonstrating what we've done. So we're working really hard. Okay.
I'm not sure what compliance.
So in terms of compliance, so it's compliance with legal legislation, it's compliance with statutory provisions. So, for example, we are required to ensure that we undertake gas safety maintenance checks, and we know that they're being done, and those are done well and to a high percentage. That's compliance. We also ask our managers, for example, to ensure that they review health and safety with their teams annually. We encourage our managers to do that, and we don't get as high a level of compliance as we would like in that area. So there are different areas that we're working on with different groups and different services to ensure that compliance is exactly where we expect it to be. We want our compliances to be 100% across the board, and what that is we need to make sure that the culture is right. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment to ensure that the health and safety culture within the organisation is good and is key. In terms of
can I just interrupt you and other people want to ask questions? Yeah, I find the word compliance very persuasive, but it's ambiguous too. Yeah.
Right.
Are you saying that there are areas that the council is not complying with?
Councillor, what I'm saying is that there are areas that we can improve in terms of our compliance. Yes.
So I asked for areas of deficiency.
So I don't have all of those areas in front of me, Councillor Todd, but there are areas in which we can improve in terms of what our health and safety performance looks like.
Okay, and who do you report those defects to, or those gaps to?
In terms of the compliance, we report upwards, as we would do with everything. We report into our DLTs, we report into our CLTs. We make sure that we're fully aware of what compliance actually looks like and the efforts that we're making to improve compliance across the board.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John. Any other questions, Councillor Giles?
Yeah, so I'm noting your kind of preamble and your introduction, I should say, rather, and even looking at what we're looking at the report. There's a lot about kind of prevention of injury and a lot into kind of what to do with risk analysis of preventing injury. Is there a reason why COVID hasn't been included, or some sort of pandemic preparedness as a risk, looking at illness and how that can impact the, obviously it falls very much within health and safety, but we're now year 2 into a pandemic, and to have no reference of that and kind of how it's being managed within the council would potentially be appropriate, considering we have no idea at what stage we're going to come out of where we are.
Yeah, so the policy is an overarching policy, Councillor, and a lot of our systems and systems of work will reference COVID specifically. So, you know, there will be risk assessments on around COVID. For example, there are systems of work that are written around COVID, but because this is a very general overarching policy, it generally mentions ill health, it generally mentions incident and accidents. It doesn't go into any specifics, so it doesn't mention falls, trips, etc. It doesn't go into specifics, but it is an overarching policy, and COVID is picked up elsewhere.
So I'm thinking, given the fact that this is now going to be updated on a year-to-year basis, would it not be appropriate to have that COVID policy as part of some of those policies that are included as part of your key corporate policies and strategies, or at least under the broader term of pandemic preparedness?
Yeah. Sorry, Victoria, you can say something.
Yeah, Victoria, you're trying to get in there.
I am sorry. I think I might be able to help with this, Councillor. A lot of those, Melanie's sort of described the systems. A lot of the policies that you're referring to currently sit under the resilience team and their responsibility around our preparedness for pandemics and the like. So the organisation has put in risk assessments related to COVID since the start of the pandemic, and they've been refreshed regularly along with things like our business continuity plans, and it's also been included in our risk register. So I think that information is there. It's probably not reflected in the health and safety policy because that's a broad brush, but it is within the organisation. And Cabinet, I think in October, agreed that we're doing an evaluation around COVID. So that'll be picking that up with members if they think there's other areas, thinking about the future where we might be able to make
and
to the way we've done things.
Goes into that resilience and continuity piece, but obviously it is a huge health and safety risk. And so, okay, would it be appropriate to also include this in the long term so it's not just about being reactive?
Yeah. But what I'll also say, Councillor, is one of the things that we do intend to bring to this committee is a performance report, and as part of that performance report, we will have specifics around areas of things like COVID and what we're doing to manage that area. So you will get a little bit more detail from us in that piece.
And obviously, this is the first time a report like this has come to us. We were very grateful that in the previous report there was kind of a bit of what's changed between last year and this year. So I think for us, we don't necessarily have that insight, but if we could include that would be useful. And also, I'm a bit of a stickler, but hyperlinks to other alternative documents that are supporting reading are always really useful when reviewing reports like this. I've kind of those who know me will know that I've made this request quite a few times.
I'll take that back, Councillor.
Yeah, no, it just makes it very easy going forward. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Giles.
Right, thank you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. Melanie, a few questions really, starting on page 147, the trade union and nominated safety rep section. Can you tell us which trade unions are engaged, and also how many nominated safety reps we have across the organisation, and whether there are any significant gaps in that structure?
Okay, so I can't answer the second part of that question, Councillor, because I don't actually have that detail. But in relation to health and safety, Unison and the GMB are represented on our HESAM group. So we have, I think, 4 union representatives on our group.
Okay, and would you be able to get, or the officers be able to get the number of nominated safety reps in due course? Next, moving on to page 150, and which also in one of the appendix, the scheme of delegation. Could you explain? There's a couple of things which seem odd there. Explain why control of Legionella and management of asbestos, the final approval is this committee, and then lone working is sitting under the lead health and safety officer, which looks like it's the lowest level of approver. Whereby lone working in terms of people out in the field, I think it should be quite a significant risk for our organisation.
Okay, so first of all, the lead officer for health and safety is a member of CLT, and at the moment it's Victoria Lawson. So it is still quite a high level of approval. With regard to those other policies, Legionella, etc., that need to come to the committee, those are our high risk areas, specifically on our property maintenance side, and we're very keen to make sure that some of the higher risk policies, although they are heavily regulated, do come to this committee.
Dear, okay, I get that. Okay, I had thought that asbestos in particular was managed to the extent that's not a risk, a significant risk, but yeah, okay. Then moving on to the risk management tools. So the risk management, page 154, 155. The question is, what tools are you using for that risk management scoring, and is that the same as the tool which we saw for audit and governance called Pentana?
So it is not currently the same system, Councillor, although we are looking at Pentana to support us fully. So this system is essentially a system that we have in place at the moment that we have, and it's not been brought over as yet. Our aim is to make sure that it's properly aligned to the other system that we have, and we're exploring that.
Okay, good to hear. And finally, on page 157, the indicators, performance indicators, I'm concerned about the first two, that we're not setting ourselves up to fail in terms of achieving 100% compliance rates. I'm conscious that in an area like HR training, is if you've got a medium to large organisation, you can never get 100% of people having done things in a particular time frame for all manner of reasons. I'm fearful that there could be something similar in this area, and that so I just want your comments on that, about whether that 100% is an achievable goal or not. And that's the end of my questions.
So, Councillor, in my opinion, it is most definitely an achievable goal, and the organisation has worked really hard to get upwards of very close to 100%. There is a statutory obligation for us to have general risk assessments, and we really need to be making sure that our managers are reviewing their health and safety management systems locally and how it applies to their staff. So these two key things are really keen in terms of understanding risk and then managing risk. So we're very keen to make sure that they achieve it. Last year they did achieve it, and very close to, although there was a bit of prodding, and we are now currently just running again a bit of analysis to get that feedback to see where we are. But for me, those two indicators are really key in terms of monitoring what we do. So our expectations are high, and I'm not going to apologise for that, but it is something that we need to do. I feel that we need to do in terms of our culture as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah, right. I must admit that my working with you, I can understand what you've just said about your high ambitions. I know that has been the case. Right. Can we, any further questions from anyone? Any statements anybody wishes to make? Can I ask then that we, right, now I've got to get the wording right again on this one, haven't I? It gets lost in amongst these 100 and odd pages. Right, so this is being moved to council?
Cabinet.
To cabinet.
Yes. Yeah, recommending for approval to move to cabinet.
Yeah, okay, so are you in agreement with that? Is anybody against? Sorry, Councillor Eason, you're trying to get in.
I was going to agree with what you were saying, and then I'm not against.
Not against.
Okay, so we've got 100% in agreement. So unless I hear anybody showing against, are there any? Right. So are we fine with that? Okay, let's move on now to any other measures the chair considers important. There are none that I'm aware of. So I'd like to thank you for your attendance. Can I also thank Melanie as a newcomer to this arena, not to this subject though. So thank her for attending and handling it extremely well. Thank you, Melanie.
Councillor. Thank you.
And now, and thank you, my colleagues, for your help and assistance this evening. Wow, we're a lot earlier than I thought we'd be. We finished before 7:30. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening that's available to you. Keep safe and keep well, and hope to see you all in the near future.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.